Hey guys, it's me, Amaterasu, back with another part 2, all for some, aka, what if Deku was a villain? Anyways, without further ado, roll the intro.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Boys, my wheels got in my bag and I got all my feels. I'm getting this paper, I'm stacking a meal. I'm with your hoe in the house on the hills. Yeah. I'ma keep it real, at the sacrifice to try to get my bands up. Shorty wanna fuck with me, she see me on the camera. She said she in love with me, but really I can't stand her. She just want part of this life cause she see me on the ground.
Chapter 7, A New Life Begins. Hello, my name is Izuku Midoriya. I am joining your class for rest of the year, Izuku said and bowed slightly to the classroom of students. Bowing let him draw a few deep breaths without it being noticed. It felt uncanny to walk through the school without anyone avoiding or scowling at him, but he was still on edge, ready to be ostracized over even a single wrong move. Finishing his bow, he gathered enough courage to get up and face his new classmates again. Midoriya has transferred to us from Aldera Junior High from Mustafa City starting today, the teacher said. Please make him feel welcome. Now does anyone have any questions, including you Midoriya? Several of the students had their hands up before she finished talking. She pointed at a girl in the back of the room. Nori. What is your quirk? Izuku gulped. Of course, they would ask that first. What else about him could people possibly care about? If he had any doubts before they were gone now. He held his hand up, the palm towards himself. Fire burst over the back of his hand and Izuku applied vibration to it as the blade stretched and thinned down. It still took too much focus to be practical in a fight, but at least Izuku could combine the quirks reliably for a while. He pushed his limits to make the blade as long and impressive as he could for the brief moment. Most people in the class were wide-eyed. Some made positive remarks about how cool his quirk was, not knowing how that wrenched Izuku inside. Izuku stopped before the teacher could comment on using quirks at school. Instead, she pointed at another student for a question. Why did you transfer suddenly and how did you even get in this school? Maybe there were worse questions than his quirk. This time Izuku couldn't completely hide his reaction. Is everything okay? The teacher asked. Why? Yes, I transferred because, Izuku paused as the words stuck to his throat as if they were trying to choke him. My mother was killed recently and, well. You don't need to talk about anything you don't want to, the teacher said, and no one will pressure you if they know what is best for them. Now, let's start the lesson. You can get to know each other better during breaks. Thank you, Izuku whispered as he walked past her to the only free seat, on the second row behind tall blue-haired kid with eyeglasses. No one tried to pull their desks away or lean away from him. It would have been nice if it wasn't all based on a lie. He didn't dare to look anywhere but the teacher and his own desk as the lesson commenced. At least she actually taught him too. The first few classes passed uneventfully. Izuku was used to getting from class to class with minimal contact with others and didn't think to do anything else. He was also distracted by the school itself. His old school had been decent in teaching for people that had good or commonplace quirks, just reputable enough that mother had not gone out of her way to send Izuku to a better school further away. The school however had not been exceptional in any way and the buildings had been average at best. Somei on the other hand showed the money rich parents had poured into it everywhere. Everything looked new, clean and shiny. Large open halls with high ceilings made the place feel more like a monument than a junior high school. The morning lessons soon finished, and he was about to slip away for lunch when. You, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku froze in place and turned around a few seconds later. It was the blue-haired boy. So far Izuku only knew that he seemed to be very formal and often quite loud. He walked towards Midoriya, waving his arms like a robot from an ancient sci-fi film. My name is Tenya Ida. Are you intentionally trying to avoid interacting with the class? We should all seek to improve both ourselves and each other and isolating yourself will hold everyone back. And quat. Izuku was genuinely flustered for the first time in a while. This guy actually had a problem with him keeping his distance and not the other way around. Sorry, he said. I didn't think anyone would feel that way. Usually people are happy that I stay out of their way. Why? Ida started and stopped mid-sentence. Izuku could see gears turning in his head with realization in his eyes. Would you like to join us for lunch at least? The request almost made Izuku tear up from joy, but even then, a nagging voice in his head kept saying Ida was only nice because Izuku had lied about his quirk. He still smiled slightly. I'd love to. Excellent, Ida responded. The cafeteria is this way. Also, your tie is not straight. It shows disrespect to this prestigious school. Izuku brought his hand to the tie that was part of the Somei school uniform. He was surprised at the other boy's sudden critique, but he didn't seem to be condemning Izuku, even if Izuku couldn't help but feel annoyed at the irrelevant complaint. He followed Ida to the cafeteria and to the line for food. Some of their classmates were already there. Hey, it's the new kid. Did Ida already chew you out for something? So he does that often? Izuku asked. The others snickered. Every single day. I merely wish everyone would give the school the respect it desires. Ida defended himself, waving his arms again. He got some laughs from the other students, but they lacked the sharp mockery Izuku was used to hearing in people's laughs. The group dragged Izuku with them to a large table full of their classmates. Izuku had never been with so many positive and neutral expressions. Hey, it's the fire hand. Izuku stared at the girl that had said that. She's talking about your quirk, another said. You didn't yet tell us what it's called. Oh right, Izuku responded. Of course they were talking about his quirk. I call it Dragon Blade. It's a pretty simple flame quirk, but if I focus hard enough it can cut really well in addition to burning. It isn't that useful really, but people seem to think it's cool. It is, the first girl said. Others expressed their agreement. Hey, how? Another student started asking, but was interrupted when Ida stood up and started waving his arms again. Remember what the teacher said. Do not push Midoriya to answer questions he doesn't want to talk about. Chill out, Ida. I wasn't going to ask about that. Just wondered what his old school was like. Very biased and more interested in gaining prestige for the school than actually teaching its students. All of its students, Izuku said, feeling a sudden need to vent about something he didn't need to keep secret. What does that mean? Izuku turned to look at his new classmate over the table. His stare was empty with tenseness on his face from anger. I was considered quirkless until I was 13 years old. My childhood best friend got a flashy quirk that could easily hurt people. One of us could do almost anything, hurt anyone, and people would still talk about how he is going to be a hero in the future. The other could have just as well been invisible and could get almost anything done to him without consequences. Would you like to guess which was me? He turned to look at the girl who had asked about his quirk in class. I hoped things might be different here, but guess what was the first thing you wanted to know about me? That startled most of the group. Several looked surprised. A few, too few, appeared angry at what they had learned. Some didn't really react or they looked annoyed. The person Izuku had been talking to moved to that group after initial surprise. Well, it's not like quirkless people could do as much as regular people. Of course a school would focus on making sure that someone more capable has a chance to become something. You should just be glad you got a quirk. Izuku sighed and stood up. This is why I didn't bother transferring anywhere else before. People are the same garbage everywhere. It's the truth, quirkless people are just less advanced than the rest of us. It's simple evolution. You wouldn't talk like that if you were quirkless for a while, Izuku said as he took his food and turned to leave. The quirkless probably dream about that being possible, but you just can't change a person like that. It would be like turning a quirkless human into a chimpanzee. Izuku squeezed the food tray, struggling to not make a remark that would make his situation worse. These people definitely would not accept his real quirk. He walked away, finding a corner table which occupants had just left, leaving the entire table empty. He was used to eating alone. At least people didn't go out of their way to get away from him. He stopped eating to look at his palm. The hole was barely covered by special tape and makeup. For the first time ever, he wanted to use his quirk on someone, and he didn't even regret the thought. If he hadn't chosen to fake his real quirk, he sighed and put his hand down. It would just have been worse if he did tell the truth. At least there had been some that reacted negatively to hearing how he had been treated as quirkless. Izuku didn't dare to risk approaching any of them and the rest of the day passed with him keeping even more distance from others. In the end Izuku left school with his shoulders sagging and eyes on the asphalt. You should carry yourself more respectably, especially in our school's uniform. Izuku turned his head to give Ida a tired look. He wasn't sure how to feel about the taller boy. Their main interactions had been Ida complaining about stupid things, but he had been the first one to at least try to approach Izuku in a friendly manner, and had seemed surprised, shocked even, when Izuku exposed his quirkless past. I carry myself as I feel, Izuku responded, and if the school has a problem with it that's just more reason to feel this way. Yes. I am sorry for how our classmates acted. Even after 2 years I did not realize how serious the views are that some of them hold. There has never been a quirkless person in our class. And what would you have done if there was? That would depend on the person. I think everyone should be treated equally unless their actions demand otherwise. Are you sure about that? Izuku said. His voice started getting some venom along the tiredness. You would do that even if it meant being ostracized just like the useless, less than human quirkless kid? Ida didn't say anything. I thought so. I was a fool to think that an elite school would be any better. It's easier to look down to people the higher you are in this quirk society, and to ignore the flaws of those on your level. Being from a whole family of heroes, you wouldn't question the darker sides of the hero society whether you see it or not. I wouldn't. Wait, how do you know about my family? I never told you about them. The most important thing for a hero in this society is their fame and popularity over all else. Ida family and especially Ingenium nowadays aren't exactly unknown. Right, I accept your explanation. They kept walking in the same direction in silence, but Izuku could feel Ida's eyes on his back. Eventually the taller boy couldn't hold things in anymore. I must ask, do you have something against heroes? Not the concept of a hero, Izuku answered after a moment. I just don't think there are as many actual heroes as people think. The official title is meaningless, just a way to control who can use quirks. If anything, it stops more people from acting heroically. Not to mention the whole profession is the top example of how people are valued by their quirks, and not even their real usefulness, but how heroic the society decides they are. I shouldn't need to explain after today's lunch. Another period of silence followed. Izuku glanced at Idaho. Are you following me or? He asked. Ida stopped for an instant and raised his hands up defensively. Oh no, I am going home. Seems we just happen to live in the same direction. Izuku looked at him for a moment. I believe you. If nothing else, I get the feeling you aren't the lying type. Thank you. Well, I guess we'll see each other again tomorrow, Izuku said and turned into a yard. They had walked up a green hill and now on a ledge with an excellent view he entered the lush yard of a new 2-story building, large enough for a family of 10. He cringed as Ida stared at the building. Why did father have to do everything so big? Izuku walked a bit faster to get inside quicker. He had not even slept in the house so far, having only made sure all his things were there. Unfortunately, it had been up to him to sort out his mother's things and what to do with them. Half of the stuff stored in one of the many rooms would probably get moldy after being soaked by his tears. Checking the time, he changed out of his school clothes and headed to the basement. His father had arranged for it to be made into a fully equipped gym and spa. Izuku had a feeling he would be expected to spend plenty of time there. The spa was nice though. He had about 30 minutes for warm-up and stretching before a familiar dark mist poured out of thin air. Izuku had a wide genuine smile on his face as Kurogiri's misty form stepped through the warp gate. Chapter 8, a villain in training. Izuku stepped out of Kurogiri's warp gate still smiling. The Nomu himself followed through, and moved to Izuku's father's side. They were in a large industrial feeling room, probably some form of a warehouse. It was dimly lit like the medical room Izuku had first met his father in before. It might well have been the same building. A loud thump took his attention as a large, somewhat human-like creature stepped out of the darkness behind his father. It was taller than anyone else in the room, with a muscular body, a grayish skin and, it had its brains visible on the outside of its skull. Dad. Is that a Nomu? Kurogiri isn't the only one? Yes, I am glad you remember my earlier explanation. That saves time, though you should know that this Nomu is mindless, essentially a walking corpse or a biological robot. Who did you use to make it? Izuku asked. Don't you recognize him? Izuku could hear the smirk in his father's voice. Then again, he did give you brain damage. A fuzzy image of the original owner of the vibration quirk flashed in Izuku's memory along with his last screams of terror as the man was engulfed by Kurogiri's mist. You saw me kill one of them. Did you think I would spare others after what they did? Kurogiri could have killed them, but deemed this a better punishment, and I agreed. This way they can pay you back by serving you. Izuku breathed in deep. He knowingly chose this life and the man had earned this fate. When Izuku was in their hands he had heard them talk about having killed other people before. They were murderers, they deserve this. Why is it here? He asked. For your training, of course. The first phase of your training will be to strengthen your body, skills and quirk until you can defeat this type of Nomu reliably. It is a low-tier Nomu, but if you can defeat it you can easily do the same to street thugs like those that kidnapped you and even low-level or non-combat oriented pro heroes. If you plan to exist in my world, this is the absolute minimum you have to be able to handle, regardless of what you choose to do. I know, Izuku said as he stared at the Nomu towering over him. I don't want to be that helpless again. You should also know that I am much harsher as a trainer than as a father. The smirk had disappeared from his father's face and voice. For the first time since Izuku had learned who the man was, he was feeling like he was talking to the dangerous villain all for one rather than just his long-missed father. What should I do? Izuku asked. We will start by seeing what you can do now. Fight and try to kill the Nomu. Use everything you know and all of your quirks the best you can. He paused for a moment as Izuku processed the instructions. Nomu, attack. The creature screeched in an ear-shattering high pitch and charged. Izuku barely jumped out of the way but didn't exactly land graciously. He yelped as his arms hit the hard floor. Nomu, stop. All for One commanded. Izuku, get up. Izuku scrambled to get up, holding his wrist that took the worst of the fall. He winced. I hope you won't be slowed down by that amount of pain. You don't want to be helpless like when you were kidnapped, like your mother was. Izuku's head snapped and he stared at All for One like even All Might wouldn't dare. Yes, let the anger flow through you. If it helps you get stronger, it is good. Your reaction speed was good, faster than I expected, but it is no use unless you know how to take advantage of it instinctually. If you dodge, you must stay mobile after the initial motion and counterattack, not become a child who slipped and needs daddy to help with the boo-boo. Izuku gritted his teeth. We are going to do this again, All for One said. Try to stay on your feet this time and use your vibrating blade. You should be able to evade and attack at the same time with your quirks. Nomu, attack. It wasn't the last time Izuku met the floor during the hour that All for One repeatedly sent the Nomu after him. In the end, gasping, Izuku was held against the wall by the Nomu, his arms held above his head, full of bruises and scabs. The Nomu had a burnt cut on its arm, but that didn't seem to even slow it and the wound was already closing at a visible speed. I think that is enough testing, his father said, his tone back to normal. There is much to do. Kurogiri. A warp gate opened under Izuku's legs and the mindless Nomu lowered him into it. Izuku welcomed the familiar feeling of the mist flowing along his legs. His feet hit something soft, and he laid in a half-sitting position on a familiar hospital bed. His father and Kurogiri stepped through another warp gate. Kurogiri reached into a third smaller one and pulled out a bottle of cold water. He handed it to Izuku. Thank you. As he drank, his father sprayed something onto the scabs on his legs before using a quirk to make them close properly. Are you feeling ill in any way or feeling pain other than from your bruises? He asked, sounding like a completely different person than he had been the past hour. All for One had done his job for the day and Izuku's father was back. Izuku smiled. My right wrist. It has hurt to move since the third time I hit the floor. His father simply grabbed the wrist, held it straight, causing a little pain. With a green glow, all of the pain was soon gone. That quirk, or quirks, were really efficient. Most healing quirks drained stamina, but Izuku didn't feel drained by the treatment at all. Then again, his injuries were minor, and father had once mentioned that the healing works better when he was more rested. Izuku started muttering about healing quirks under his breath even as his injuries were healing. You truly inherited my interest in quirks, his father said. It is very useful, especially with our quirk. Yes, Izuku said, there is one thing I don't understand. If you have such a good healing quirk, or quirks, why are you still so injured, deformed, barely alive? He finished the question. Izuku nodded. While my healing quirks are powerful, there are limits to what they can do, and they do not work passively. I was only saved by a different quirk that allowed my memories to be stored in my spine before All Might crushed my head. Izuku squeezed his hands into fists, being reminded of what had happened to his father and by whom. That let my consciousness survive until the doctor got to me and reassembled my skull with surgery and other healing quirk users, but it could only work to a point. We did not possess any quirks that could reverse such total damage. I still require regular treatment, but that is more to maintain my current condition rather than heal anything further. We recently acquired a more powerful super regeneration quirk, but it is a blunt tool, excellent if you already have it in battle, but unable to affect wounds that have already closed. So, there is no way to? The doctor is still researching possibilities, but so far there is only one way that isn't more likely to kill me in the process. I need to combine my other healing quirks with One for All. One for, Izuku started. Is it a quirk related to All for One? His father nodded slowly. When he spoke, he didn't seem to focus on anything in the room. His voice was best described as nostalgic. It is a generational stockpiling enhancing quirk I accidentally created in my little brother. I believed he was quirkless and gave him a power stockpiling quirk that I thought might help his weak body. Only later we found out he already had a quirk. It was a very much useless ability to transfer itself to another person and nothing more, as far as I know. Somehow the quirks fused into one, something that took the doctor a century to replicate artificially and Kurogiri. I doubt I need to explain to you what combining those two powers means. Izuku was already thinking. He rubbed his chin with a now fully healed hand and started muttering to himself. A quirk to stockpile power and quirk to transfer itself. Generational stockpiling enhancing quirk. Normal limits of quirks. Human lifespan. Passing on the quirk itself, not just inheriting genes. And quat. Izuku's eyes widened. Does the quirk also transfer the power it has already gathered? Yes, and it has already been wielded by 8 different people for more than a century. Accumulation type quirks that can constantly grow rather than just needing a charge time to use, have much more potential than more stagnant quirks, theoretically unlimited potential if they weren't limited by effects of aging and human lifespan. If this quirk can bypass that and be passed on faster than normal human generations, Izuku stopped mid-sentence. By now a quirk like that could make its holder one of if not the most powerful person in the world. You could say so, his father said. One for all is currently possessed by All Might. Izuku stared at his father for a moment, but it did make sense. He gestured at his father's head and mask. So, he did this to you with a power you created? Yes, though the only surprising thing was that he won. My younger brother did not share my visions or ways of getting there. He used One for All to try and fight me, and everyone that has inherited the quirk since has continued the fight. I believe there was one who disappeared for several years, until someone else appeared with the quirk. I have tried to take it many times, but it is the only quirk that has been able to resist my All for One. You couldn't take it? Izuku asked, surprised. No, so far it can only be passed on willingly. In hindsight it would have been better to just kill one of them and end the quirk, but I wanted it. I have wanted it since I realized what I had created, so even though they all have sought to kill me, I had to let each of them pass the quirk forward in the hope I could one day take it. But I was careless, and while All Might was hiding in the United States, I got tired. I no longer ruled Japan and the Hero Society was already rising, but my underground empire was still vast and stable. After a century of fighting and plotting I started questioning my way of life. I had already created new identities to act as covers and took a step back from my organization to try something different, a vacation of sorts to rest before All Might would return. Then I met Inko. How did you meet? Izuku asked, holding back tears from the mere mention of his mother. We accidentally bumped into each other at a cafe. She was so flustered and apologized repeatedly, as if it was some serious situation. I thought it was stupid for an adult, but something about her was endearing. I had never spent time with someone like her as a villain. I asked if she would like to sit down with me. One thing led to another and you were born 2 years later. And quat. He paused and ruffled Izuku's hair like no one else had ever done. I still took business trips, but most of the time I could enjoy regular family life for the first time since my own childhood, and those weren't peaceful times. Some days I even imagined putting my ideals aside to stay like that, at least until you grew up. What would 18 or 20 years be for a struggle longer than a century? Unfortunately, All Might returned to Japan while Inko was pregnant with you. I had to split my time with you two and one other while trying to maintain what I had built, but in the end it took all my time to hold him back and Inko started getting suspicious. I came up with a working abroad lie. Then my fight with All Might happened. He finished healing Izuku's injuries, even the smallest bruises. He helped Izuku sit up on the edge of the bed and sat down next to him. After that I decided it was best for both of you, easiest for everyone if I just stayed away. You were wrong, Izuku said quietly, looking down. It wasn't easy. You made it quite clear the day all three of us were in this room. Father paused. Now it's too late. It is. For Mom, Izuku said and leaned against his father. You're still here. I don't care what you look like, never did. His father chuckled and pulled him closer. How did a villain like me earn a son like you? Perhaps I should then act like a father. How was your first school day? Izuku stiffened. Somehow, he hadn't expected that question. It was fine. Do not lie to me, his father said with a stern, threatening voice. Izuku shivered hearing it. While I loved Inko, I know she was a bit gullible. Don't think you can pretend in front of me like you did with her. Promise you won't let Kurogiri go to the school, Izuku pleaded, getting only a nod in response. The Nomu in question remained quiet and motionless, but his glowing eyes were focused on Izuku. I pretended that the dragon blade is my quirk, but when they asked about my old school I admitted to being a late bloomer and what that meant. I don't think they are all the same, but some of them are pretty bad. Talking about evolution and comparing quirkless people to chimpanzees. I have never actually wanted to take someone's quirk before, but today. I would not fault you, but that would cause problems, so unless you want them to experience a sudden accident. No, Izuku blurted out. I just need to figure out who are the decent people, if there are any. Have you noticed anyone specific yet? Maybe one. He criticized people about little things and comes from a hero family, but it's impossible to know how he would be in a different situation. He still felt like a decent person besides the annoying strictness. At least he criticized my actions, not what I am. He somehow got me to talk about how I feel about heroes on the walk home. He didn't judge me for it. Maybe he was just surprised. A hero family, you say? His father asked. Ingenium's brother. His father was silent for a moment. Izuku couldn't read the expressions on his missing face and started getting nervous. Eventually his father got up. Not the worst of them. I won't involve myself with whatever you want to do with him. Just remember, he would still want to destroy us if he knew about me, so be careful. Even if your quirk is exposed, claim it is just a random mutation you hid to prevent bullying. If anyone asks, tell them your father breathes fire. Of course, Izuku said and followed his father, getting off the bed. Thanks for being a dad, I guess. Mom always asked how I did in school. I always lied. Maybe if I didn't, she would have. Something impacted Izuku's cheek with enough force to yank his head a bit to the side, air flowing past his head. After blinking a couple of times, he saw his father had his hand up, palm towards Izuku. Don't start blaming yourself for what ifs. Nothing good comes out of it, and once you start it is difficult to stop. I know. Izuku rubbed his cheek and looked at the floor. It is still true ... and quat. This time Izuku saw the air blast coming early enough to flinch, but it wasn't enough to evade it. Dad. I told you not to do that. If you want a father in your life, that includes disciplining you when needed. Is that your idea of disciplining? Izuku asked, shocked. Actually, it is part of your training, but works for both. I warned I would be harsh. This quirk is called air cannon. I held back most of its power, so it won't cause serious injury, but its speed makes it excellent for training. Izuku stared at his father, but it was impossible to win a staring competition with an eyeless man. In the end, Izuku could only pout. His victorious father continued talking about training. Your main limitations in the fight were skill, speed and agility, both in evasion and attack. Strength isn't such a concern when you're using the vibrating dragon blade, which is the only combination you can use without raising unwanted questions. Unless an enemy has a powerful defensive quirk, you will be able to cut them. However, the quirk is useless if you get crushed by a stronger, faster opponent before you can use it, or if you cannot hit the enemy at all. In the worst case, you could be killed before even being able to fight back if you are targeted. Do you understand? Yes, Izuku answered. Good. Your training will have 3 parts. You will follow a physical training regimen on your own to make sure your body is capable and healthy. I will help you control your quirks, all of them, and monitor combat trainings with Nomus as often as I can. I want you to be always alert even outside training, so I will use the air cannon anytime we are together. You must be able to evade sudden attacks also outside of training sessions. That is the only way for you to be as safe as possible. That's why you are so harsh, right? Yes, his father answered and put his hand on Izuku's shoulder. I will also have the doctor provide you a copy of the super regeneration quirk a bit later. It is very powerful, so we should wait longer for your body to adjust to holding your current quirks. You need to learn control in the meanwhile. We'll do that after your combat training sessions. So ... and quat. Izuku started, now? His father smiled behind his mask. Very good ... and quat. Chapter 9, Izuku Shigaraki. Izuku yawned, leaned his head sideways and rotated his shoulder, still sore from his morning and evening gym training. He'd have to check the instructions on the stretches again. He wasn't excited about feeling like this all day every day, but his father really wanted him to get fit soon, so random criminals couldn't just grab him like they had that one time. With his studies and all the other training, he didn't have much free time left, but he was sure he could squeeze in more training than his father's plan required. He counted hours in his head and scribbled notes on his notebook, trying to figure what would be the most efficient use of his time. Father wanted him to improve his agility, so Izuku started wondering what would help with that most. Midoriya. Ida stood up and turned to face Izuku, waving his arm. You have been muttering the whole lesson. Stop that. It is distracting others and you should focus on the lesson yourself. That is enough, Ida, the teacher commanded. Midoriya, focus on the lesson. I don't know how your old school did things, but here we don't think about other things in class. In my old school that was dependent on a person's quirk, Izuku answered, wondering how long they would keep treating him as the new guy. He had transferred months ago. The lesson, Midoriya. Focus on it. Izuku shut up and focused on his notebook, the one with notes for the class. They were studying history and had just reached the point where people started being born with quirks. Now, the teacher continued, as part of your grade you will do group presentations for the societal consequences of quirks appearing. I will assign the groups. Izuku wanted to smirk. They were literally talking about his father's childhood. The only problem was explaining to his group where he found the information. Team 3, Tenya Ida, Izuku Midoriya, and Nori Uehara. Izuku's face froze, staring forward when the last name was declared. It was bad enough to be in the same class with the girl that would have compared him to a chimpanzee just a year earlier. The idea of having to work with her made him think about his father's mention of a sudden accident. His hand shot up. You don't get to change your group, Midoriya. Here we expect everyone to be able to work with everyone. Your topic will be the rise of organized villainy and the so-called emperor of villains who nearly ruled Japan. Izuku would have fallen off his seat if he wasn't still so focused on who he needed to work with. A chair scraped against the floor as Uehara joined him and Ida. They stayed quiet until the teacher finished assigning groups and let them work for the rest of the lesson. Uehara was the first to speak. So, has either of you ever heard about this so-called emperor of villains? I have read about a villain that created an army of followers when the societal order collapsed. I don't think his name was mentioned anywhere, Ida commented. That is because he only used the name of his quirk, Izuku said, speaking only to Ida, unwilling to even look at the third member of their group. It was called All for One. How do you know that? Uehara asked, sounding like she didn't believe him. I have a bookshelf full of notebooks on different quirks. And you complained about valuing quirks. And quad. Uehara raised her nose and managed a grin so arrogant Bakugo would have been left second. Being interested in quirks and valuing people based on their quirks are two different things. One gives you knowledge, the other just makes you a trash person, Izuku recited in tired tone. Remember when you said that it is impossible to make a person quirkless? Yeah, the whole idea is ridiculous. Not exactly, Izuku said, finally meeting the girl's gaze. He had to choose his words carefully. There are a lot of inconsistencies with any sources on All for One, but most sources from the time claim he could take and give away people's quirks. Many of people followed him because he either gave them quirks or took away ones they didn't want. Must have been pretty dumb people to have given their quirks away, Uehara said. Just because you only care about people if they have quirks doesn't mean everyone else does, and some quirks aren't any better than being quirkless even today, Izuku said. He was squeezing his hand into a fist under his desk. Especially back then when quirks were relatively rare. Imagine having a mutant quirk or hard to control quirk with side effects when people with quirks were seen as you see quirkless people. Fine, you're right. Being a mutant quirk freak isn't that much better than quirkless. So, do you think Ida is a freak since he has a mutant quirk? Izuku shot back. How many people does this class actually have that you don't think lesser of because of their quirks? Izuku had never even raised his voice, but the people closest to them were already stopping their own discussions to listen in. It's not like they are quirkless, Uehara bypassed the mutant question. Some of us just have better quirks. You should see it. Uehara, I still don't even know what quirk you have, Izuku deadpanned. He was tired of this and it showed. He couldn't even get emotional at her. I doubt it will help with the assignment, so I don't care either. You too, Ida interrupted. We have an assignment to complete. Can you show us the sources you got that information in? Ida asked. Izuku tensed. Probably. It has been a while since I ran into them. There are a lot of old books of people describing their experiences after quirks appeared. I can look into it after school. Is there anything else you can think of we should look into? Izuku hummed a bit and looked away from his teammates, trying to think of something and remember both things he had heard from his father and what he had actually read. We should consider differences in how people saw these things compared to today. Like today people talking about that time talk about how many villains there were and call All for One the emperor of villains, but I don't think people at the time really used those terms. The clear heroes and villains system only appeared later. It was more about being vigilantes or criminals or, Izuku paused, maybe revolutionaries. At that both Ida and Uehara seemed confused. Lot of people tried to use the chaos to rebuild society the way they thought right, and things now are as they are because of who eventually succeeded at that. I think that would be a more accurate way to describe All for One than the emperor of villains and Apos. People probably call him that mostly because winners write the history books. That could be an excellent point of view, Ida said excitedly waving his hand side to side. How did people see villains before the term became common, and how the societal progress led to our current understanding? Yeah, something like that, Izuku said. At least Ida didn't disregard the idea straight away. They mostly focused on the idea of how people viewed things and the structure of the presentation for rest of class. Izuku promised to get more information and got out of the class as fast as he could. It was the last lesson of the day, so he left and only stopped some distance down the street. Soon Ida walked out and started down the same street. He waited until Ida reached him and then matched the taller boy's pace. How do you feel about the idea of looking at the assignment from how people at the time would have seen it? Can you write about it without framing it in as a modern heroes and villains system? Shouldn't we discuss this with the whole group? We are supposed to be able to work in teams no matter what we might think about the other members. No, Izuku responded. Excuse me? I've spent too much time surrounded by shit people, Izuku said looking at the ground. I tried being nice and making friends, tried to ignore them, tried to turn the other cheek, let them mock and harass and do whatever they wanted without standing up for myself. It doesn't help. I only got away from them when I left. I am too tired of our garbage to ignore it again, pretend it is not important, or work with people like that just because a teacher that has never experienced it says so. Don't you feel anything that she called you a freak? Of course I do, but it is not our place to disrupt the class for personal reasons. Like he hadn't already disrupted the same class. You want to become a hero, right? Izuku asked. Of course. How are you going to stand up for people if you can't even stand up for yourself? If capturing a criminal would disrupt something in someone's life, if it wasn't polite or convenient to do in that situation, would you just let them go? Izuku's words left Ida silent, but Izuku felt like ranting a bit more. Something in Ida made him seem annoying enough to need a reality check while also feeling like someone that was safe to talk to. Part of Midoriya simply wanted to test him. Ida had been nice. He had only judged Izuku on his actions, but he already knew Izuku had a quirk without knowing what it really was. When Izuku continued, his voice was much quieter. If you aren't going to stand up against what is wrong no matter what, don't become a hero. Someone will die waiting for you to help them. Having family members that are heroes doesn't make you one any more than a hero license does. They kept walking in silence until they reached Izuku's house. Right at the gate he stopped and sighed. Sorry for venting like that. I'm just too tired of people like her to just take it. I'll try to look up the information for the assignment. And quat. He turned his back to Ida to get inside. Midoriya, Ida said, making him stop, what happened to you? Remember the second question people asked me on my first day? What I said before the teacher said I didn't need to. Izuku walked inside without waiting for Ida to remember and leaned against the inside of the door. He really needed to be more careful at what he said. Thinking of that, he was reminded that he needed to find an excuse why he knew about All for One. He glanced at his palm where the little hole was hidden behind the tape and makeup. After a moment he headed to his room to do his homework in the little time he had reserved for it. Afterwards he headed down to the gym to prepare for the evening's training. Kurogiri showed up right as he was supposed to, but as Izuku stepped closer, Kurogiri didn't immediately open a portal for him. Young Midoriya, your father has told me to take you somewhere else today. He has decided that it is time for you to meet someone before training. Izuku raised his eyebrow and tensed up slightly. He had not seen many people with his father, just Kurogiri and the doctor who didn't really show himself. If his father was going to introduce him to someone else, he at least trusted Izuku, but what kind of person would this be? I still need to talk with Dad also, he said. Of course, Kurogiri answered and opened a portal. He is receiving treatment but will be in contact with us. Good, Izuku said and stepped through the portal. He looked around as soon as his head left the mist. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but a reasonably decent looking, though windowless, bar was not that. He quickly focused on the only person that was already in the room, a light blue-haired pale-skinned man with a freaking human hand on his face. Izuku hoped for the best but got the feeling it was not fake, but a real human hand. The man's mere presence put Izuku on edge in a similar way to facing a Nomu in training. So, who is this kid Kurogiri? The man asked in raspy voice. His name is Izuku Midoriya. Young Midoriya, this is Tomura Shigaraki. The strange man looked down at Izuku, scratching his neck. Even though he had no weapons, Izuku got the feeling of danger from the man. Hell. Hello, Izuku said, stuttering for the first time in a while. I don't like him, Shigaraki rasped and suddenly moved forward, reaching his hand towards Izuku. Thanks to his father's training, Izuku stepped aside to evade the attack in time, but it turned out to be useless as a small mist portal appeared in the path of Shigaraki's arm. Behind the man his hand appeared from another portal midair. It swung in anger and touched one of the bar stools along the brown wood counter. Izuku gulped as the stool turned into dust. One touch from this man and he would be dead, and he couldn't even see if the quirk was active as one could with his dragon blade. This one is not for you to kill, Kurogiri reprimanded Tomura. Master would be very angry if you did. Why would sensei care about some skinny kid? That is a very good question. All for one slightly distorted sound came out of nowhere. After a few seconds Izuku spotted an empty computer screen and speakers. Shigaraki pulled his arm from the dark portal and Kurogiri moved to clean the pile of dust it left behind. Izuku's father continued, but is that any way to talk to your brother? Brother? Izuku and Shigaraki said at the exact same time and with the same tone. Izuku, father started, Tomura is someone I saved as a child shortly before your birth. I may have been more of an occasional sensei than a true father, but he is effectively my adoptive child. Tomura, Izuku is my long-hidden biological son. You two should get along. The two youths stared at the blank computer screen and then each other. Shigaraki started scratching his neck. You mean there is another Shigaraki? Shigaraki asked. Izuku blinked, staring at him. What do you mean? He asked. Shigaraki is the name I gave him. It is my original name. Midoriya was the identity I created, father explained. So, my name is made up, Izuku said, surprised with how much the thought stung. Aren't they all? You know what I mean, Dad. Can I at least have the real name, Shigaraki, now? Izuku asked. It took a while for his father to answer while Tomura kept scratching his neck ever faster. Here you can, but to the rest of the world you and your father must still be Midoriya. And quat. Sensei, why are you doing this? Tomura interrupted. There wasn't supposed to be a player too. There wasn't, but things changed. Though it is not yet completely sure if Izuku will be a player and Appos. There are still choices he needs to make. So, I will still lead the league? Yes, Tomura. The league is yours regardless of his decisions. Depending what Izuku chooses, he can do other things for this family business of ours. I would benefit from a representative to send in my name rather than the league. You two should still work together and help each other. Fine, Tomura rasped, what can he even do? You mean what my quirk is? Izuku said, already disappointed. Quirk, talent, skills, whatever, can you actually be useful to the sensei, or are you planning to drag us down? Izuku stared at his adoptive brother for several seconds, and slowly a wide grin spread across his face. Unlike students with supposedly bright futures at every school he had ever gone to, this creepy villain didn't just care about how he happened to be born. I think we can get along, Izuku said. You didn't answer my question, Shigaraki complained. I know a lot about different quirks and what they can do. Dad and Kurogiri are teaching me how to fight, and I inherited Dad's quirk. Sensei's quirk? Tomura asked, staring at Izuku without moving for a while. Yes. I can take other people's quirks, though I have only taken 2, Izuku said. Tomura continued staring at him for a moment and sat down on the closest stool. So, another boss fight for the heroes. Probably not, Izuku waved his hands defensively as his smirk turned into an awkward smile. He too sat down a couple stools away from Tomura. Without saying a word, Kurogiri pulled a bottle of cold lemonade from under the counter. It was even Izuku's favorite lemonade. It is yet to be seen. Nevertheless, you will not talk about Izuku to anyone, Tomura, not even within the league, their father said as Izuku sipped the drink. You should let him know what you can do too. I can destroy. I have trained to fight and destroy. My quirk can destroy anything I touch with all 5 fingers, and my goal is to destroy what I hate. Like what? Izuku asked, once more uncertain on how to feel about the man. This whole cursed hero-dependent society where the wrong quirk is enough to destroy your life. Where people walk around smiling even surrounded by deadly quirks, but abandon people with quirks they randomly choose to fear, or just ignore others' plight because they think a hero will come. I want to bring it down and grind it to dust. Maybe we have something in common, Izuku admitted, hesitantly staring at his drink. But what then? Tomura looked at him confused, as far as Izuku could tell with a hand on the man's face, but instead of a clear question there was just a huh. What are you going to do afterwards if you collapse the society? Do you have a plan or conviction for something? Not that destroying an entire society is something you can just do. Oh, then what would you do? Izuku turned his head to stare forward at the bar's shelves of drinks. After a moment of silence, he decided what to say. I think we feel the same about how this society is, but destroying it wouldn't help anyone unless you can create a better one in its place. Honestly, I have never seriously intended or planned to do anything major to change the world, though spending time with Dad has made me think about it more. I think I would want to change the society, not destroy it, force it to bend if that is what it takes. Maybe it breaks in the process, but even if change needs destruction, it should be to create something better. There is no point destroying for the sake of destruction. It should be a means to an end at least. Tomura started scratching his neck again. Before he could respond or try to disintegrate Izuku again, their father's chuckle came through the speakers. You should listen to your brother, Tomura. You still need to learn how to think more than one step ahead. Whether you manage to destroy what you hate, that alone will not take you forward or make the league more than a short-lived collection of thugs. Yes, Sensei, Tomura said, his face visibly tense even under the hand. He might have also gritted his teeth together. You should take some time today to get to know each other. Unfortunately, I cannot run your trainings as usual today, Izuku. The doctor wants to run some treatments today. I'll tell him to prepare for yours. You can spar with Tomura if you think you two aren't going to kill each other in the process. It might be and quat, Izuku said and fell silent mid-sentence. What do you mean prepare for mine? I told you I would have him prepare a copy of the regeneration for you. Your body should have fully stabilized from your last acquisitions, if you feel you are ready. Regeneration? Tomura asked. You are giving him a quirk like that even though he hasn't yet done anything? Yes. Why? Because unlike you, his body can adjust to handle it without extensive modifications, which the doctor isn't ready to do yet, unless you want to become a Nomu. Izuku should also be better able to suppress the quirk when needed to hide it, at least once I am done with him. His father's tone made Izuku shiver. Tomura stared at the screen for a moment before turning back against the bar counter and gesturing to Kurogiri. He muttered quiet enough that father might not have heard. Definitely a boss battle. Do you want to talk about anything else? Their father asked. Yes, Izuku said quickly, then shrunk a bit, poking the tips of his index fingers against each other. He even looked away, even though he had only been looking at an empty screen. Kurogiri gave Tomura a drink. I was going to ask if you know anywhere where I might find information on, well, you. You need to explain more, my son. We have a history assignment at school. My group has to talk about the Emperor of Villains. Well, that is a name I haven't heard in a while. I thought so. I need to know about those times for the presentation and find sources to explain why I knew about you in the first place. Sounds like you have been careless, TSK TSK TSK. Somehow Izuku managed to shrink even further on the stool. His father hadn't reprimanded him like that before. Early level boss, Tomura muttered. Chapter 10. A new villain is born. Liquid dropped around Izuku, leaving his skin sticky as he was pulled up from the tank. As soon as his feet touched the floor they gave up and he collapsed on his knees. He was shaking and breathing hard in his oxygen mask. Doctor? His father's voice sounded somewhere nearby. Minor state of shock and residual pain, unsurprising since he is still fully human and the quirk has a strong impact on his physiology, even if he can adapt to it and didn't require other changes. I could administer him sedatives to ease it, but he will properly recover faster without them. A firm hand landed on Izuku's shoulder. It stayed there until Izuku's shaking eased and his father took away the oxygen mask and pulled him to his feet for long enough to reach a nearby hospital bed with a pile of towels already there. Izuku grabbed one to clean his face. The sticky feeling was disgusting. How are you feeling? He had to wait for a moment while Izuku wiped his face. Izuku could barely speak, his breath still heavy, never doing that again. Gaining quirks that involve physical or physiological changes can be unpleasant and implanting them artificially like this needs to be done with enough time. You will not need to endure the same while acquiring quirks with your own, the doctor assured. How long was I in there? Just over 2 days. It is Sunday evening. Will I feel better by the morning? Mostly yes, the doctor said. This time Izuku could actually see the doctor. The old man seemed really familiar, but Izuku couldn't place the face. You survived going to school with brain damage. You will survive this. You can pretend to be sick for a day if you need to. No, Izuku responded, shaking his head. We have our history presentation tomorrow. The doctor looked toward father. At least she raised him to be conscientious. That she did. I could already see it in his training. Izuku looked away while wiping himself. He still wasn't used to receiving much praise outside of his mother's. The doctor pulled a tray closer and turned to Izuku. Don't bother. It won't go away until you get a proper shower. I will take blood samples for a checkup and then you can go. Do you think it succeeded? Izuku asked. The doctor looked at him for a moment through his big goggles. He put down his still unopened needle for taking blood and picked up a scalpel, which he held in front of Izuku. That is up to you to test, the old man said. Izuku took the scalpel and stared at it. His hands started shaking again. You don't need to try it now, but you should be able to endure much more pain than that, his father said. Izuku gulped. He knew that, and the scalpel would be little compared to some of his training sessions. Cutting himself just went against fundamental human nature. He held open his left hand and brought down the scalpel with the right. He winced as the blade cut skin and drew blood. He cut about a 1 centimeter long cut and stared at it, feeling a little ill. At least he would have stared at it, but after blinking he couldn't find the wound anymore and there was no pain. Wow, Izuku gasped. Excellent, now you can survive actual training, and with the summer vacation you will also have time for much more of it. Izuku's hands weren't shaking anymore, but the cold shiver was almost as bad. Concern for what actual training would mean made him forget any worries about the presentation. He was still feeling like he might vomit if he got up from his seat too quickly. He didn't even scowl at Uehara when he had to stand with her in the front of the class. Uehara started with the basic facts of the era. Of course, she blamed the quirkless majority of the time for everything, depicting spread of quirks as the reason for things getting better. He even briefly imagined reaching to the girl and demonstrating all for one for the presentation, but restrained himself at least that much. The teacher didn't interrupt or even scowl at Uehara's bigotry. Ida at least stuck to the script, discussing the rise of organized villainy and first points about the emperor of villains and Apos. Then it was Izuku's turn. Despite being often referred to as such in modern history books when they mention him at all, the sources of the time do not seem to use that name, as it only appears in sources written decades after he rose to power. We also could not find any reliable source about his original name. Most sources from his lifetime seem to refer to this man as All for One. This was the name of his quirk and secret to his power and influence, Izuku explained and tried to stand steady despite a growing nausea he was feeling. Today, with quirks so common, they are widely considered an inherent part of a person, like any organ or thoughts in your head, so most people naturally find this hard to believe, but based on sources from the time, All for One possessed a unique quirk that allowed him to take other people's quirks as well as use and give them away. It is not known if the quirk had any limitations. As expected, the statement caused muttering across the classroom. The teacher seemed thoughtful. Izuku continued explaining how All for One gained power with his quirk, leaving out details he would not have found from their sources and leaving in some falsities that he did. He was still careful to not refer to his father as a villain except in the sense of how modern society described him. As for how his story ends, we don't really know, Izuku lied. There are no reliable records of his death. We have read some stories talking about him being around even in modern times. Some online conspiracy theorists even claim All Might stopped him, but that would make him well over 100 years old. Either way, trying to fit him in the modern hero-villain dichotomy with names like the Emperor of Villains is inaccurate and fails to explain how things were back then and his role in all of it. Looking at him without falling into using our modern standards, it seems he sought change in the society as it was at the time, like many others did, but was over time simply left on the losing side and labeled a villain for opposing what we consider the norms today. Winners write the history after all. That is the end of this presentation. Thank you for listening. He got an applause that seemed more cautious than the previous presentations had received. Izuku glanced at the teacher who scribbled notes and then turned to face them. That was an interesting presentation. Especially many of your conclusions went beyond what is generally required. I am curious of what sources were they based on? You especially didn't seem to question the existence of the quirk all for one much, even though its supposed ability runs contrary to our current understanding of quirks. The so-called current understanding of people in this society includes many ideas, especially about quirks, Izuku said and glanced at Uehara. That doesn't make them true. If you look at the actual sources and statements from the time without bias, they are consistent on the basics of his power. The sources are listed in the notes of the slides. I had to go to the National Diet Library for the most important ones. The most surprising part is that he seemingly had massive influence on the country, but almost no one today seems to remember him beyond vague stories of an emperor of villains being a major villain a long time ago. No other history class I have been to has even mentioned him, at least not by name. Did you go all the way to Tokyo to visit the library? The teacher asked. Only Midoriya did. Ida admitted not knowing how easy travel was by warping. He found most of our material that wasn't online. The teacher nodded and wrote notes. I also liked how you discussed people's different views back then compared to today. Good thing people have learned and evolved since then, Uehara commented. Too bad Midoriya wouldn't properly discuss the flaws of the ideas of people like this all for one. Just because people didn't realize to call him a villain doesn't make him not one. You think that every idea that disagrees with yours is flawed, Midoriya added. And you can't see the reality. Probably because you barely got a quirk and can't properly appreciate it. At least I don't shit on people for how they were born. You are no better than the people that treated first people with quirks like monsters. Midoriya turned to face Uehara. Okay UTW. The teacher paused mid-sentence as Izuku stumbled and brought his hands to his mouth. He spun towards the door a bit unsteady, but it was already too late. A single gagging noise was the only warning before Izuku's lunch came up and onto the floor. Ha! Uehara laughed even as Izuku rushed to a nearby trash can. Seems you can't stand even your own ideas. Uehara, teacher said, go back to your seat. We will talk after the lesson. Izuku would have been happy to see a teacher doing at least something to her, but that little wasn't exactly enough to distract him from vomiting in front of the whole class. Maybe standing around for a long presentation hadn't been the best idea the day after finishing a quirk implantation. The regeneration quirk was really exacting a price for its power. It was still worth it though, as proven by his shattered arm the next time he trained, when his father let the Nomu fight more seriously. At least the creature stopped when Izuku told it to. His father came to kneel next to Izuku. Izuku yelped and bit his teeth together at the pain of burns and broken bones and the reformation of those bones as his body healed from the damage. Thankfully, the quirk worked rapidly. He could see his arm twisting back to its normal direction at a visible speed and soon the pain too started disappearing. Not long after the injury was gone and the only sign of it ever existing was Izuku's heavy breathing that took a while longer to calm down. He raised the formerly broken arm, flexing and turning it. The only pain he felt was in his head from adapting to the powerful quirk. He got up to face his father. Do you understand now the reason I have pushed you so hard? Imagine if a hero or villain did that to you. Even with the regeneration you were completely incapacitated and vulnerable. As powerful as this quirk is, it does not make you immortal. And it still hurts, Izuku said and looked at his healed arm. He barely noticed his father's arm moving just in time to lean away from an air cannon blast. Then train until no one can hurt you. I am an elderly man stuck to a breathing machine and still need to hold back. An elderly man with hundreds of quirks, Izuku pouted. Actually only 94, father responded. I used to have more, but even for me it was quite a mental strain at the peak of the number of quirks. After my injuries it became too much. In a single day my near unlimited potential was diminished to a fraction of what it used to be, so I shed some and decided to be more selective. I think my limit now is around 100 depending on the quirk, and the doctor worries even that will yet decline. I have already noticed greater strain in using my quirks. Izuku stared at his father for a long moment, uncertain how to respond. You still have the potential I lost. You only need to work to build on it. So, father stepped away. Nomu 2, destroy. One of the Nomus waiting at the edges of the room charged forward, reaching to grab Izuku, who jumped out of the way. A long and thin blade of flames appeared behind his right hand as he activated the dragon blade in vibration. A rapid swing cut the Nomu's hand off. That much he had managed before, but the other hand was coming in for a punch. Even as he had swung with one blade, he was forcing the other to gather and thicken against the back of his other hand. Manipulating the shape of the fire he could use, it was a small shield instead of a blade, but if he was too slow again, or the shield was too thin again, he would need to rebuild an arm again. The fiery shield hummed from its rapid vibrations until the noise was covered under a loud thump. Izuku flew backwards, feeling his bones creaking as they barely held together. He stumbled as his feet touched the ground a fraction of a second later, but this time he remained on his feet. The Nomu continued its assault, charging forward with its cut and singed arms spread wide. After enduring a shattered arm, that was one bear hug Izuku did not want to experience, unless the creature was planning to tear him in two. Izuku's first instinct was to scream and run. His father's training was to attack. With adrenaline running through his veins, Izuku charged forward, ducked under the Nomu's arms, and shoved his right hand upwards. Hot droplets fell on Izuku, making him to jump away just in time to avoid being trapped under the falling body. He crouched to stare at the Nomu, the dead Nomu, with its exposed brain split in two and not healing. Excellent, his father said. Your first clear victory, and you didn't even need the regeneration. I didn't mean to kill it. My body just moved before I had time to think. That means you are developing proper fighting instincts. Your analytical abilities are impressive, but sometimes you must be able to just move, unless you find a quirk that increases the speed of thought, he declared, wailing close enough to ruffle Izuku's hair as he spoke in a softer, warmer tone. I know it is a bit shocking to you. With Kurogiri around, it is difficult for you to accept this Nomu was just a brainless creature, but you still did good. In fact, I have a gift for you. Nomu 1, bring the suitcase. Quat. The Nomu that had broken Izuku's arm before took a large black briefcase and brought it to the father and son. The father took it and held it open in front of Izuku. Izuku simply stared at the contents for a moment until he reached in and took out a black face mask reminiscent of the lower half of his father's helmet. It wasn't as thick and wouldn't have covered its user's neck, but the front had a thicker shield-like part than his father's. It didn't have pipes coming from it, but the black metal had silvery horizontal lines that mimicked their look. Is this? Heroes have their unique costumes to help in creating their public image. Many villains have them as well, but primarily to hide their identity, he said. You told Tomura you want to change the society instead of just complaining about it, something I have been waiting to hear. If you are going to be involved with anything without abandoning your normal life, you need a costume and a new identity. Go take a shower and try it on while I clean up this mess. Izuku took the suitcase in silence. He wasn't even sure what to think about this gift. He was grateful, but it felt like he was being pushed ahead faster than he was prepared for. He took off his shirt stained in Nomu blood and took a long shower to wash the rest off himself. As he was drying with a towel, he stopped in front of the bathroom mirror to see if he had washed off everything. He stopped to stare at his reflection and wonder who was the person looking back. Some of the depressed tiredness he accumulated over the years was gone from his face, and his reflection looked older than he remembered, both his face and body, and the later was really starting to show the results of his training. His endurance was never bad, but in the past no muscles had been actually visible. Now he was at least as fit as Bakugo. Just thinking the name made his expression darken and he went back to the briefcase. He was suspicious of what his father and especially Tomura planned, but someone had to stand up against the Bakugos of the world. Izuku changed into the new villain costume. Similarities with his father's usual dress were obvious, but instead of a regular black suit, Izuku's costume was more akin to a formal military uniform with a solid black jacket and pants and, luckily, no tie. It actually reminded Izuku of his former black school uniform, which was the biggest problem that he had with the clothes. They were more comfortable than they seemed and didn't feel like they hindered his movements. There were two exceptions to the simplistic formal look. It came with quite tall and heavy-duty metal reinforced combat boots, and gloves which also had metal at the back of his hands, fingers pieces like brass knuckles, and most likely fire protection for his quirk. Izuku would have preferred red boots though. It took him a moment to figure out how the helmet worked. Besides the collar, it had a thinner top half which the front side of folded inside the sturdier back side. The lack of clear eye holes worried Izuku a bit since, unlike his father, he still had his eyes, but from the inside he could actually see just as well as with no mask at all, despite how the outside appeared. The one-way lenses even had a heads-up display. Cool, he said, surprising himself with the distorted and low voice that came out of the integrated voice changer. Somehow the lower part of the helmet seemed to fit it, a communication device, a microphone, and what appeared to be filters for a gas mask. He returned to his father. All of the low-tier nomus were gone and there wasn't as much as a bloodstain left of the dead one. It was just his father, Kurogiri, and surprisingly Tomura. Hello. Brother, greeted Tomura. The young man looked at him for a moment and muttered, literally a mini-boss. Looks good, just as I expected. How does it feel? His father asked. Great, like it was custom tailored for me, Izuku responded. That is because it was. But I never got measurements taken. I had to replace my eyes with quirks. In some ways they are better than normal vision. Acquiring precise measurements was no problem. I even observed how you typically move. The costume was made to work as a formal wear inspired by military uniforms to look representative, while still being simple and practical in battle. The material is fire and stab resistant, but you will need something heavier if you plan to get shot. Not that getting shot would kill you anymore. Formal, Izuku muttered. When you first introduced me in Tomura, you said something about being a representative. Yes, All Might may have decimated my previous empire, but many separate operations still remain, mostly information gathering, secret research, and agents running my legal cover businesses. Things that cannot easily be stopped by punching. For years I have kept them under control from a distance, but sometimes a more direct contact is beneficial. Kurogiri can do only so much while Tomura and the doctor are busy with other matters. So, you want me to be your messenger? Depending on your choices, you can become much more, but let's start with something less dangerous at least until you are equipped with more powerful quirks, in case you need to fight during such a mission. What do you mean? Izuku asked and activated his dragon blade. Both your blade and All for One are already known to others. At the moment you can only rely on the regeneration and vibration quirks while wearing that suit, unless you are prepared to eliminate any and all witnesses. Dad, Izuku said, walking closer to his father, there was a time I wanted to be a pro hero without a quirk, and if I practice with the vibration enough, I think it can be almost as powerful as Tomura's quirk and even more useful, if I can control it enough to not give people brain damage. Tomura huffed at the mention of his name and walked away. All for One looked thoughtful. I did not intend to understate your abilities, but can you blame me? Parents worry. Skill or quirks, I will make sure you will be strong enough that danger fears you. Starting tomorrow we'll focus your training on using the vibration quirk alone. Until then I think you need a practice mission. You think I am ready? Maybe not yet. This time you will be accompanying Tomura on one of his meetings. Get a feel of things in the shadows of the society. Tomura, he is all yours for the rest of the evening. Try to bring both of you back in one piece, without need for regeneration. Great, an escort mission. I hate those, Tomura muttered. Kurogiri, make us a gate. We'll see how. He paused and looked at Izuku, a strange look in his eyes. What? Izuku asked. What are we going to call you there? Oh, right, I can't let people hear my name. I need a code name if I'm going to do things like this. What do you use? Tomura Shigaraki, Tomura responded, annoyed. Your normal name? This is the only name and only life I have. I don't need to bother with any other shit. Then you could call me Shigaraki too, Izuku said, at least until I can think of an alternative name. We are brothers after all. Tomura stared at him for a moment and turned around. Fine, just don't get into my way. Kurogiri, gate. Izuku's favorite Nomu did as told, and a wall of mist rose in front of the two brothers. The darkness of the mist was replaced with an alley that wasn't much brighter. So where are we going? To meet a small gang and recruit them for the League. I am no messenger. Sensei trusts me to create and lead the League to support our goals. I will build an entire army for him and destroy the so-called symbol of peace. Build an army. We are recruiting soldiers. Got it. Here, Tomura said and pointed at a worn-out back door. Izuku reached out to knock. Stop you fool. You are going to reveal we are coming. Aren't they waiting for us? I thought you have arranged a meeting with them. I am arranging a meeting with them now, Tomura said. Have to show NPCs their place and what I can do right from the beginning. In the underworld strength matters more than being nice. Now get out of my way. Tomura reached for the door clearly to turn the whole thing to dust. Wait, that might attract attention. I got an idea, Izuku said and pressed his fingers against the lock. It began shaking as he activated his vibration quirk and sped up the vibrations until there was a metallic crack. Izuku poked the door, and it opened without resistance. He stepped aside and looked at Tomura who was scowling behind his face hand. After you. Remember, I am in charge. And try not to look too weak, Tomura said as they walked to a small room and headed down a narrow spiral staircase. I will follow your lead. You have more experience in this. Yes, I do. The stairs creaked as they stepped on them, but as they descended that was covered under the sound of music coming from behind a door at the bottom of the staircase. When they got closer Izuku could also distinguish happy chatter. Tomura stopped and raised his hand with one finger up. This one is mine. He slammed his hand and all 5 fingers against the door. Both already worn out paint and exposed wood quickly turned gray and began shattering into dust. The chatter behind the door ended. Finally, whatever was holding it together failed and a cloud of dust fell on the ground. Behind it was a living room or lounge type room with worn out furniture and a shelf full of alcohol. Half a dozen people were standing facing towards the former door. Most of them had mutant-type quirks with all kinds of appearance-altering mutations, many on the more visible end of the spectrum. Izuku couldn't help but wonder if discrimination for those quirks had led them to this place. One of them, for example, had 4 arms and strange light blue skin with a lot of sharp edges, like some kind of rock. Another had 4 legs, each in 90-degree angles from each other. The most normal-looking person was wearing a skull-like helmet and small lighting sparked between his fingers, an electric-type quirk. Izuku was worried if the man could use the lightning from a distance. "Mind if we come in?" Tomura said and stepped over the pile of dust he had created. "Not if you don't mind dying," the 4-armed blue man said and charged at Tomura. Izuku crouched into fighting position, but Tomura was faster. Tomura evaded the larger man's attack, tripped him and elbowed his back in rapid attack that slammed the man onto the ground. Without his father's harsh training, Izuku couldn't have even followed Tomura's moves properly. Tomura put all but one finger on the man's head. "If I touch him with the 5th finger, he will share the fate of your door," Tomura threatened. "I have come to talk, not fight. Stand down or die." Izuku wanted to comment on the hypocrisy in Tomura's statements, but he didn't want to upset the already dangerous situation. He tensed suddenly. Something nearly imperceptible moved at the edge of his vision. A step sounded against the floor. The attacker was fast, but not as fast as Izuku's father's air blasts. Izuku leaned out of the way of the near-invisible attacker and slammed his fist at the back of the attacker's head. The chameleon-looking villain became visible again, groaning against the floor. In a split-second decision, Izuku mimicked Tomura, holding his hand against the chameleon villain's head despite the dark memories that the action threatened to bring up. "Stay down," he said, his voice made more threatening by the helmet's voice changer. "My quirk can be just as deadly as my brother's." "Who are you?" the electric man shouted. Izuku glanced at Tomura. "I am Tomura Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains, and I have come to offer you an opportunity for something more than this." Tomura gestured at the shady room. Compared to it, the League's bar was a high-end establishment. "And who is your brother?" the same electric man asked. Tomura growled at the question. "He is observing." "So, the mighty leader of the League of Villains needs a babysitter." "Actually, I am here to learn from him," Izuku said, worried at what the seething Tomura might do. He took his hand away from the chameleon-like man and nudged him to get up and join his friends. "You can free the other if you listen." "Fine, we'll listen, but that doesn't mean you get to leave alive if we don't like what we hear." "You talk big, but do you have the guts to live up to your words? So far you have committed random street crime and killed small-time thugs. I am offering you an opportunity to go after much bigger prey, to tear down the society that has oppressed you for how you were born. I will turn it to dust. And quat. Following his declaration, Tomura remained quiet, his eyes locked on the man in front of him, waiting for a response. "So, you are going to destroy society?" the electric man chuckled. "Even if we assumed you could do that, what then? What will you do when there is nothing left?" Izuku could see Tomura's finger twitching, the only one that was needed to disintegrate the man under him. The group in front of them seemed similarly tense. Izuku wasn't yet sure about Tomura's full capabilities, but they were outnumbered. He didn't share Tomura's apparent confidence facing those odds, not to mention Tomura's trouble answering that particular question when Izuku had asked it. He gulped, grateful that his face was completely covered. "Destroying the current society doesn't mean there is nothing left," he said. Tomura turned to give him an angry stare, but it was too late to hold back. Tomura himself had told him to show strength. "Everyone here should know the wrongs perpetuated by this society. I am sure all of us have experienced them in some fashion, whether it's discrimination by how we were born or being failed by those so-called heroes who the society has made itself dependent on by suppressing everyone else, and any change that might threaten their power. For anything to change those systems, and people's belief in them must be destroyed, especially people's false confidence in the heroes. And that is going to benefit us how? As long as a small minority dominated by people with specific types of quirks is allowed to dictate what people consider right or wrong, everyone outside that ideal are doomed to live as second-rate citizens. Without people's support, it will be much harder for heroes to hold on to that power." "Can't argue with that. At least you have a vision. It doesn't mean you can make it reality. How would you destroy people's faith in heroes?" "By destroying their symbol of peace," Tomura said, hiding most of the anger he certainly felt. The electric man whistled. "Ambitious, I'd tell you to go to hell with that delusion, but the man pointed at Izuku, sounded like you have an actual plan. Personally, I am interested in seeing where this league goes. Now if you would let our friend go." A while later, Izuku followed Tomura back up the stairs in silence. It was hard to tell Tomura's real feelings. Despite his usual behavior, he had actually kept cool in the meeting. They stepped back to the dark alley. Izuku saw the approaching hand just in time and jumped aside before Tomura could grab him. After failing at that, Tomura started scratching his neck. "You bastard, what did I tell you when we came here?" Tomura seethed. Don't be weak. No, I am in charge. You were supposed to shut up and stay out of the way. I was going to, but you still haven't figured your answer to that question. Dad would have been disappointed if the mission failed. You can take the whole credit if you want to. I don't care about the credit. The league is mine. Help Sensei however you can, but stay out of my way. Okay. I'm not interested in the league. I just want to do best for our family. Homura stared at him for a moment, turned away and pulled his phone to call Kurogiri. Just stay on your own boss level. And quat. Well. It seems like we've come to the end of part 3-4. What if Deku was a villain? This is Amaterasu signing out for today. Have a wonderful day/night. Bye.